I remember it like it was yesterday. Thanksgiving Eve of 1992. I'm looking through TV Guide to plan my Thanksgiving Day viewing because for some reason they never played normal TV shows on Thanksgiving. There's no Disney Afternoon, there's no Way Cool Weekdays, it was just some random bargain bin assortment of shows with no apparent rhyme or reason. So I'm looking through the TV Guide and all of a sudden, something catches my eye. Battletoads. Battletoads? Wait, do they mean the Battletoads? As in a Battletoads cartoon? And so that year I planned my entire Thanksgiving around watching that Battletoads cartoon. Had my VHS tape ready to record, and I had my alarm set even though I couldn't sleep because I was so excited to watch the Battletoads. And then finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the moment came and it finally happened. Although now, if you hear about a video game adaptation coming out, you generally expect it to be trash, we didn't have that same expectation in 1992. At that point, the Mario Bros. Movie was still a year away, and the video game shows that were out were pretty good. The Legend of Zelda cartoon and the Super Mario Bros. Super Show were both really good in my opinion. And then you also had a bunch of other video games crammed together in Captain N the Game Master and the Power Team. Maybe my standards were different when I was a kid, but I enjoyed those shows thoroughly. So anytime there was a new video game coming out on TV, it was an event. But the fact that you probably do not remember this Battletoads cartoon at all shows you just how successful it was. But anyway, let's take a look at it. So the one episode of Battletoads that exists begins with a title card that tells us the name of the episode, Battletoads. And it's written by David Wise. Note that this is not the same David Wise who wrote the soundtrack to the Battletoads video game. Coincidentally, this is an entirely different David Wise who also happened to be a writer for the Ninja Turtles cartoon, a series that you might say bears a little passing resemblance to Battletoads.
Cowabunga! Cosmorific!
Professor T-Bird and Princess Angelica are being chased through space by the Dark Queen and her goons. So far, this is pretty standard Battletoads fare, except for one detail. There's no toads. But that's okay because Professor T-Bird has a plan.
The genetic essence of the Battletoads!
Oh, God.
He's gonna make some toads.
But with this essence, we can create a new generation of Battletoads to protect you!
Yeah, this is an origin story. Cut to our toads to be. Meet Morgan Ziegler, Dave Shar, and George Pye. These three guys are a bunch of high schoolers who are having a bad time at high school. While playing some video games, these guys talk about how nice it would be if only life were more like a video game. Oh my god, how meta. Suddenly, T-Bird and Angelica come through the screen and T-Bird sprays the boys with his toad juice, and the magic toad juice turns them into toads. But don't get too worried, they can turn back into humans if only they say the magic words.
Let's get normal!
Gosh!
And if they want to, they can turn back into toads with the other magic words.
Let's get Woody! Toads rule!
You're kidding me, right? You have 2 chances to get a catchphrase. Actually, wait, 3 chances because they really wanted to make Psychotronic happen.
Psychotronic!
Actually, wait, they got 4 catchphrases because they also like to say...
Toads rule!
So you have 4 catchphrases on a Battletoads TV show, and not a single one of them is totally awesome. I'm glad this show didn't get picked up. But anyway, where the hell did this origin story come from? Because I've never heard of such a thing. And I know that sometimes when you adapt a video game or any other property, you take some liberties with the backstory to make it a little different for what you're doing. And at first, that's what I assumed was going on here, something they just made up for the cartoon. But then I checked Wikipedia, and according to Wikipedia, the Battletoads were humans in the games, but I don't remember that. According to the game's backstory, the Battletoads originally have been human computer technicians and roommates. The trio tested the original Battletoads game by playing the game as the Toads in a sort of virtual reality simulation. They became suspicious of both their boss and the chief game programmer Silas Volkmeyer and decided to investigate the office at night. Upon finding the video game unit turned on, they tested it to see if it had been tampered with. This was a trap, and they were transported to another planet, permanently transformed into Battletoads. I just do not recall that story, and now it also contradicts what happens in the cartoon. But I thought maybe I just forgot about it, so I checked the instruction manual of the original game. Here's what the manual says. After her defeat by the Galactic Corporation at the Battle of Canis Major, the Dark Queen and her renegade space troops retreat to the outer reaches of the universe, hiding out in the dark spaces between the stars. Meanwhile, on board that spaceship Vulture, Professor T-Bird and the Battletoads, Rash, Zitz, and Pimple, are escorting the Princess Angelica back to her home planet, where her father, the Terran Emperor, awaits her safe arrival. Along the way, Pimple, the biggest Battletoad, takes Angelica out for a cruise in the Toadster to a nearby leisure station. Pimple and Angelica burn space, but the Dark Queen ambushes them before they can get there. Luckily, Pimple manages to send out a distress signal before the Toadster is gobbled up and carried away to Ragnarok's world, the Dark Queen's planet. So there's the situation, Toad. The Dark Queen's kidnapped the Princess Angelica and your best buddy Pimple. What are you gonna do about it? You're gonna get real mad. That's what you're gonna do. And then you're gonna get Why does the story of Battletoads suddenly turn into like a late night sex hotline dialogue? Professor Bird's gonna set you down on Ragnarok, but from there it's up to you. You've got a long way to go, Toad, through ice and fire and nightmares so... I can't finish this, but you get the story. There's no humans in here. So at this point, I'm completely puzzled where this other origin story comes from, so I'm looking at Wikipedia's sources. There's a source linked in the part where it specifically talks about the Battletoads having always been human in the games, and it links to a Killer Instinct blog. The post that it links to talks about the possibility of Battletoads appearing in Killer Instinct. Did you know the Battletoads are actually human? That's right, the Battletoads were human video game testers testing a video game called, naturally, Battletoads, that became part of the game itself as the Battletoads, Zitz, Rash, and Pimple. Now imagine an alternate version of this story that would fit with the lore of Killer Instinct. Ultratech taking a human and performing anthropomorphic tests on him that results in the creation of a Battletoad. The Battletoad is entered into the KI tournament to see how he performs with the promise of being returned to his human form should he successfully defeat his opponents. Ultratech has some of the best scientists in the world, having spliced human and reptile DNA to create the intelligent Riptor, and then even creating the fire being Cinder. So it wouldn't be far-fetched to believe they could develop a human-turned-toad battle warrior, right? So although this writer was actually correct in predicting that Killer Instinct 3 would have Battletoads, specifically Rash appeared in the game, this is basically just a speculative blog post that doesn't really serve as a source for proving that the human backstory is canon. But with that being said, we have all these different sources giving the same backstory, and it's a backstory that also contradicts the cartoon, so it had to have come from somewhere. Well, as it turns out, this story came from the June 1991 issue of Nintendo Power. In that issue, there was a Battletoads comic that was written by Valiant, who, if you watched my Glass Joe video, you'll remember that Valiant wrote the Nintendo comics that came out around that time. The Battletoads comic follows the story of three guys, Morgan Ziegler, Dave Shar, and George Pye, which are the same names that they had in the cartoon that came out a year later. Morgan, Dave, and George are so exciting to watch play video games that they can fill up entire arenas, which is strangely prophetic for a comic that's mostly been forgotten about. These guys become suspicious of the game's designer, Silas Volkmeyer, and rightfully so because he's definitely up to no good. So the still human Battletoads sneak into Silas's lab to investigate what he's been up to and find that the game has been tampered with. When they go to see what's been done to the game, they wind up being turned into Battletoads permanently. And it was all an evil plan hatched by Silas Volkmeyer and the Dark Queen, who as it turns out, was also a game character that Silas brought into reality. Can you blame him? And from that point on, the game and the comic mostly go in the same direction while the cartoon starts to do its own thing. What you got going on there, Pimple?
Serious crap!
At some point, the Dark Queen and her goons come out of a Slurpee machine and have a fight with the Battletoads. And while they're fighting, a surf rock version of Hava Nagila plays for some reason. Why would they do that? Is Morgan Ziegler having his bar mitzvah? Does the winner get a bris? Can he even circumcise a toad? Eventually, trying to fit in on planet Earth and needing to pay the bills, Princess Angelica gets a job at a coffee shop.
Hey, watch it with the jelly donuts!
Some more fighting happens, and then this is the point where the cartoon meets back up with the game in the comic. Princess Angelica gets kidnapped, and everything culminates on a big battle at the top of a rotating tower, and the Battletoads save the day. Ultimately, I don't think the Battletoads cartoon was that bad. I actually liked it a lot when I was a kid and would watch that same VHS tape over and over again, but it definitely didn't match up with the other game cartoons that were out at the time. At the same time, there was much worse stuff out there, and we were still a few years away from being saturated with anthropomorphic animal superheroes. Over the next few years, we would wind up with cows, and mice, and sharks, and cats. If anything, maybe it's just that toads were a bit too turtly. And as for the backstory of the Battletoads being human, although there is not a single in-game source that corroborates that story, there are some allusions to it in the SNES game Battle Maniacs. In particular, Silas Volkmeyer makes his debut in the game, and it makes reference to his ability to manifest game stuff into reality. To me, that makes it likely that the Nintendo Power backstory was intended to be canon. Furthermore, it's also a neat way of explaining why the Battletoads games are so hard. You have the game designer who's deliberately making the game impossibly hard because he wants to kill the Battletoads. But I'll put a poll up to see what you guys think. Anyway, if you like this video, you'll definitely like these other videos. Also, I've got shirts now. Psychotronic.